Well, the election is now over, which means Barack Obama is free to go back to being the imperialist warmonger taking over from George Bush that he's always been. Well, because the election's over, he no longer has to pretend that he's the peace and loving president that's thinking about everybody and trying to do what's best for everyone. So which means now, because the election's over, they can go ahead and start pounding the hell out of Syria again. Except now they can go ahead and they're actively outright saying that they're involved in Syria now. The gloves are off. They're now free to do whatever it is that they want to do. A Turkish official has said that they are in talks with NATO that include the United States putting in Patriot missiles inside of Turkey to protect a safe zone inside of Syria. That's right. The U.S. will now be sending its own equipment and weapons into the Syrian conflict, whereas once before they were done through like an arms dealer getting supplies through. But now, full-out U.S. military cooperation with the Syrian rebels will now actually be taking place. Now, these developments, the fact that this is now going to happen very overtly and out in the open is going to happen, took place only hours after Barack Obama was elected. Well, you know, he kind of had more important things to do, like convincing everybody that he wasn't George Bush. That way nobody would vote for Romney and that everything changes now, right? So what it means is that the Patriot missiles will be placed inside of Turkey for a defensive purpose of preventing possible incursions into Turkey from Syria. Like how the Syrian Free Army terrorists would launch an attack, run back to their allies in Turkey and hide. And that while they're on the run back, they get shelled or attacked by the army. And if one of those happens to come close to the Turkish border, it's now, oh, we now have to fire missiles into Syria for taking care of chasing after the rebels. I mean, isn't this a little bit similar to the whole situation that happened in Vietnam with the bombings of Cambodia? Like that? Viet Cong soldiers were running into Cambodia and then coming back out in order to do attacks, and the U.S. said, we're not attacking, and then they go ahead and attack. Isn't this kind of just a little bit of a double standard? I would think that if Assad was actually involved in the war, like Turkey blatantly obviously is, aside from just giving moral support, but actually hiding them and giving them bases in which to operate outside the country, and sending them war materials and being a conduit through which other countries can send war materials, that they should be a legitimate target. NATO was already involved. Turkey is already involved in this war. So what's the deal with pretending to create a safe zone? What's the deal with pretending it's to defend Turkey in case Syria decides to invade? They're already involved in the war. They are already carrying out attacks against Syria. So all of this is just completely pointless. Now it is Britain and American officials are considering meeting with the rebel commanders. Now before it was these messages passed back and forth, but now they're talking about actually going out and like having actual meetings and doing the whole diplomatic BS when they're really just outright backing them. Now, if the contacts were to happen, they would be most likely conducted by Robert Ford, a former U.S. ambassador in Damascus. Well, there's a coincidence, eh? Now, all of this is taking place as the rebels, or as they should be more accurately known as terrorists, are making further pushes into the capital, going for Damascus. I believe it was Wednesday they made the last push, and the fighters fired mortar shells at the presidential palace, but they missed. I'm just reporting that it happened. I'm not taking pleasure in their lack of accuracy in any way, shape, or form. Now, while all this is going on, at the Za'atari camp, there's about 40,000 estimated 40,000 to 236,000 people who have fled from Syria into Jordan, trying to get away from the fighting. And that's creating a humanitarian situation just as a result of all the fighting. And then, of course, the Western media is turning around and blaming Assad, because Assad somehow had something to do with the Syrian terrorists, the NATO-backed terrorists attacking the country. I mean, let's just cut the whole pretext right here. All right? This is the West invading Syria, the exact same thing that they did to Libya. And if this is successful, it will be the same situation all over again. The al-Qaeda all over the place, massive social unrest, a complete destabilization, the destruction of all infrastructure, including hospitals, communication systems, public transit, all those kinds of things. And the same is going to happen. There's going to be this warlordism that's going to pop up as a result of almost pretty much exactly the same situation that happened with Libya. It's going to happen once again here in Syria. And all of this is a result of Syria just not being a puppet of the United States. Because Syria and Bashar al-Assad doesn't actually go ahead and just be an imperialist puppet. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the countries that the United States, the West, NATO are having a problem with are all the countries that, don't bend to their will. Syria, Iran, Palestine. Do you really think that this is just a coincidence? I mean, these massacres against the Arab Spring are taking place in Qatar and other countries, and the media is just completely looking the other way, doesn't care. I mean, if they're going on slaughtering their own people, you would think the U.S. would be so outraged, and NATO would be angry, and the U.K. would be backing up the U.S. on doing something about it and placing sanctions and all that stuff. But they're not. They're basically just completely looking the other way. Why? Because they're a U.S. imperialist client state. And as a result, they don't actually care. Remember, the killings are wrong if someone they don't like theoretically did it. I mean, you don't have to prove it. You can just claim it based on nothing. But if one of your own client states actually goes out and actually does this, then it's just completely looking the other way. I mean, it's a terrible double standard when it comes to human rights. But more importantly, we have to keep in mind that all of this is just an assault on Syria, because Syria is not a puppet. Assad is not a puppet. Whether you like Assad or not is really irrelevant to the point. The point is, Assad is not a puppet, and Syria is being invaded by these terrorists, by the U.S., by the UK, by NATO, because he doesn't carry out what they want to do. And that's all this really is about. It's all about destabilizing this government so that possibly the last of the last free, independent Arab states can be taken over by U.S. imperialism. And that's what all this is about. And it should not be a coincidence that all of this has escalated as a result of the re-election of Barack Obama. Now, don't get me wrong. The same thing would happen under Romney. In fact, a lot of what happened in the past 4 years, the same thing would have happened under, what's his name? I don't even remember. John McCain. In fact, it would have been a lot worse. But the same things would have happened. And it's interesting to note that only a few hours after the election was over, when Barack Obama was trying to pretend that, he's everybody's friend, and he's this peace negotiator, and he's trying to do what's best for everybody. Really? Is everybody out there glad now they went out and voted for two imperialist candidates? Are they? Doesn't really matter. The elections are a fraud anyway. Just keep that in mind the next time you hear about another war in the Middle East being started by NATO.